Thank you for joining us on another iTWire video with top executives. In this case, it's Reed Taussig. He is the CEO of ThreatMetrix, and I'll get Reed to explain ThreatMetrix in a moment, as well as the fact that ThreatMetrix has two interesting Australian connections. One an Australian founding, but now it's a giant US company, or global company, and then another Australian thing. So Reed, thank you for being here with us today.
Appreciate it, thank you.
So please explain to us, what does ThreatMetrix do? People might think it's a security company, but there's a lot more to it behind that.
Yeah, there is actually. So ThreatMetrix is a leader in what we call global shared intelligence. What's happened in security over the course of the last 5 years really is that the threat has moved from the inside to the outside. I mean, this week's hack of Sony Pictures is a result of their movie about Kim Il-jung in Korea. Really demonstrates the fact that the persistent threat to organizations is typically not originating inside. It does from time to time,
sure,
but the number of attacks that occur from the outside daily, every day you pick up the paper, every day you see a new one, are huge, and you don't know where they're coming from. You know, ThreatMetrix as a company processes, we did 35 million transactions yesterday. 5 million of those were suspicious in one way, shape, or form. So, you know, it demonstrates the fact that global cyber terrorism, if you will, whether it is being used to make money, in fact 75% of all attacks are financially driven, whether it's being done for political purposes, whether it's being done for espionage or IP theft, it doesn't really matter. The reality is that it is emanating from all points of the globe, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So ThreatMetrix decided to create a concept of global shared intelligence. And effectively what it is our customers, 3,500 customers, 12,000 websites, completely privately, so tokenized, so there's no loss of personally identifiable information, there are no privacy issues. But effectively what we do is all of the members, all of our customers, share intelligence data. And it's really used for two purposes. One is to identify good customers, the other one is to identify fraudsters.
I mean, we see that sort of thing with the consumer internet security, where they have the cloud-based detection of suspicious files. This is just taking it to a much higher level and spreading it across the enterprise, your enterprise customers.
It does take it to a higher level for a couple of reasons. One is that it's real time. So all of the information is delivered back to the customer in 200 or 300 milliseconds. But it also provides historical evidence as well. So we can manage and track reputation, not based on inference, but based on factual data. But we can also look at what's happened today. So the power of the ThreatMetrix network is we can, for example, tell you, Alex, that your email address is being used on 5 different devices in 3 different countries and 4 different time zones. You've been hacked. Likewise, we can tell our customers that Alex is actually a great internet citizen, that in point of fact, his credentials that he's used across the ThreatMetrix network have been stable. Somebody hasn't come in and changed his ship to an email address, but left his bill to address the same. And then in fact, he's been very successful in terms of interacting across the net at social networking sites, at large e-commerce sites, at banking sites, and in fact should be a trusted customer. This is a very important issue for customers today, because what's happened is that the increase in, the only thing that I can really describe it is global cyber terrorism, and that's really what it is. The increase in global cyber terrorism has precipitated an equal increase in step-up and out-of-band authentications. So it becomes very inconvenient for customers. If every time you want to log into your credit card account, for example, at a bank, that they insist on sending you an SMS message to validate who you are, it's a huge inconvenience for customers. In fact, if you look at shopping cart experience with large retailers, 67% of them fail. Half of that is due to the fact that customers are just shopping. I want to know what it costs.
Window shopping.
Comparative pricing, things like that. The other half, though, are due to security issues. And 30% of that, our customers feel that there's too much security. They don't want to deal with an SMS message. And for me, for example, I travel extensively, a couple of 100,000 miles a year. So, I want to log onto a bank account, or I want to accomplish something, and the enterprise sends me an SMS message while I'm getting on the rental car bus, or I'm trying to get through security in the airport, and somehow I'm supposed to magically remember this 9-digit code that I'm supposed to fat finger back into this thing. It doesn't work at all. So what's happened as a result is that the increase in step-up authentication, two-factor authentication, has begun to impact the top line of online businesses.
And where previously it was boosting the top line, but now it's sort of come full circle. Now it's causing problems.
That's right. And if you think about it, a reduction of 2% in top line revenues way overwhelms the cost of fraud. So on the one hand, customers are looking to ThreatMetrix to be able to use the information that we provide in real time to be able to authenticate a good customer. If you are a good customer, they want to do business with you, and they don't want to put you through
the hoops,
all of the hoops that might dissuade you from doing business and go to some other website.
I mean, one of the things must be a world where you are recognized by ThreatMetrix or by the business as being that customer, and so they don't have to authenticate you at all. They already know you. And so you sort of reduce those authentication steps altogether. I mean, in a perfect world.
In fact, it's more interesting than that, because with ThreatMetrix, this global shared intelligence network, I don't need to authenticate you. You may have never visited my website before, but one or more of the other 3,500 customers that we have did authenticate you. And so this is the power of ThreatMetrix, is that I can immediately, in real time, use shared global intelligence. So, for example, if you ended up going to an e-commerce site yesterday and purchased, let's say, an iPhone 6, for example, and now all of a sudden you're at a different e-commerce site and you want to purchase some accessories for your iPhone 6 or whatever the case might be, ThreatMetrix can tell that new enterprise, even though they've never seen you as a customer before, that yes, in fact, Alex really is Alex. That this ship to, bill to, email address, this device, in fact, was used yesterday with the same credentials successfully, and it was used 3 months ago, and it was used to do something, to buy airplane tickets or to, get online and review a vacation spot or something like that.
So how far away are we from that in reality? Years, months?
We do that today.
So but no, I'm talking about where I can go to another online retailer, and not have to authenticate myself at all in terms of, I don't know, putting in usernames or passwords. I mean, will that time come? That's what I mean.
It has come, actually, for many customers. In fact, it has come. So one of the largest credit card companies in the world uses ThreatMetrix to passively authenticate customers to ensure that they are who they are without forcing some kind of step-up authentication, which is a username and password. They do that today. We have other companies that provide services such as tax filing that does that today.
Yeah.
So it's a reality today.
So this is one of the things that makes ThreatMetrix unique compared to its competitors?
Completely. I think that if you take out the big credit card companies, Amex, Visa, people like that, Amazon perhaps, ThreatMetrix probably has the largest shared global intelligence network in the world. But unlike other companies that have personally identifiable information about you, for us, it's all tokenized, it's all privatized. So what our business really is I don't need to know your name to know who you are. I mean, if you look at a credit bureau, Vita, for example, here in Australia, is a fabulous partner of ThreatMetrix, and we do a lot of business together. We have a very compatible relationship. Their business is, I need to know your name to know who you are. They have very deep knowledge about who you are, where you work, when you filed your taxes, where you live, so on and so forth. And they can pull it up on a screen and validate that. They can call you up and say, do you live at 123, Better Street in Melbourne, or whatever the case might be. ThreatMetrix has global information. We track information on hundreds of millions of email addresses, hundreds of millions of, actually billions of devices, hundreds of millions of ship to and bill to addresses, other things like that. But it's all private key encrypted when it comes to ThreatMetrix, and it's done in such a way where we can compare the information so that I can tell you, for example, that your email address is associated with these 3 devices, and these 3 devices are associated with these 2 ship-to addresses, and these 2 ship-to addresses are associated with these credit cards, and so on and so forth. But I don't know what any of that information really is. So we process it in a way so that our customers can compare information. So, for example, if you have more than 5 email addresses, I mean, we see fraudsters, frankly, that have 50 email addresses.
Yeah.
I mean, you know it's a fraudster.
It raises a flag right there. Yeah.
Right away. You know that if a customer's ship-to address and email address has been changed in the last 4 hours, but their bill-to address is it's a fraudster.
Yeah.
So we can look at that. We can compare the information, but we can't actually read it. So what it does is, and it's very important today, I mean, you know, the issue of internet privacy, the policies behind it, the concern around it is growing as fast as cybercrime
bigger
is.
than ever, yeah.
Yeah, it's growing as fast as cybercrime is. And so customers, enterprises and customers want to know that A, their information is secure and that it's completely privatized. Well, I don't need to know your name or your real address or your real email address or anything like that to look for the markers which would indicate whether you're a good customer or a bad customer. So that's really the power of ThreatMetrix. Is Hillary Clinton's book. It's It Takes a Village to Raise a Child. You know, you don't know that Johnny's doing drugs until he goes and does a sleepover at his friend's house, and his mother calls you up and says, "By the way, Johnny's doing drugs."
Yeah,
that's the power of ThreatMetrix, and so it's really a unique, exciting system, and it's provided us with fabulous success. I mean, the company has doubled every year ever since we've been in existence. You know, by the way, for the Australian viewers, ThreatMetrix was founded in Australia. We maintain the core of our development group, our engineering group. About 25% of our total employee population is here in Sydney, and it's been a very, very successful enterprise for us here in Australia. Fabulous people, and it's really worked great.
Yeah, I mean, it was founded in 2005, 2006 by Alistair Faulkner and David Jones, and then you bought out Trust Defender in the end of 2012.
Yeah,
end of 2011, actually.
We closed it. Matter of fact, Andreas Baumhoff and I finally closed it on Christmas Day.
Right, in 2011.
So we got that done. We did that because Trust Defender had some very interesting technology with respect to identifying malware.
Yeah.
And so, you know, ThreatMetrix has multiple components of its product, beginning with device identification.
And knowing if a device is infected with malware, especially one that you've never seen before, must be a vital component to doing everything else that you're doing. And now it's been integrated into the system for some years.
Right, exactly. We fully integrated it. We actually fully integrated Trust Defender into ThreatMetrix. I'm very proud of saying that typically technology purchases where one tech company buys
acquisitions are often nightmares. You know.
Yeah, they usually blow up.
Yeah.
We ended up maintaining all but 2 people, and they still work at ThreatMetrix. And in fact, members Andreas is CTO, his brother Matthias is Vice President of Engineering. So, you know, in some ways, the acquisition of Trust Defender, just in terms of the acquisition of people that we got, was more valuable than the product. And I'm not trying to discount the product,
of course not,
but it's been a very, very positive and successful.
As you said, there's still 25% of the companies based in Australia.
Right, and growing. By the way.
Growing, yeah.
And growing.
Now, you mentioned you spent a number of the last 8 weeks on the road, traveling all over the world. This must be to see customers and to be talking to. Well, just give us an idea. Obviously, a lot of the customers are private, but what's the sort of the various fields that they work in? Obviously, it's banking, financial services, but just a sort of a sprinkling.
So we're in 3 principal businesses. One is e-commerce. So ThreatMetrix is, I think, the undisputed leader for protecting card not present. So I get on the internet, I want to buy something, I provide a credit card online or PayPal or some other form of payment like that. I think we're the undisputed leader. I know we're the undisputed leader in terms of protecting online payments across the industry. And if you look at it, I believe at this point in time, 55 of the top 100 internet retailers in the U.S. are ThreatMetrix customers. It's a global business for us. We operate in every continent and across all segments. So, you know, whether you want to buy movie tickets or sports tickets or electronics or clothing or whatever you're going to do, your shopping experience online, ThreatMetrix is in many cases involved. And in fact, we estimate that we do as much as 1 out of every 4 credit card purchases goes through the ThreatMetrix network during the holiday season in the US. So e-commerce is about 40% of our business. We have a number of very, very strong global partners in that space, CyberSource and Certify. Both of those companies are out of the United States. CyberSource is owned by Visa, the Certify is owned by American Express, and so they have very, very strong connections into the e-commerce space, and we partner with them on a number of accounts, and we do a lot of business direct as well. Yeah. Financial services is also about 40% of our business. Very fast-growing business. It's also a global business for us, and we have very strong partnerships. Vita here in Australia, Fidelity Information Systems in the United States, and others around the world. And then the third component of our business, which is also a very fast-growing business for us, is media. And media is kind of broadly defined. It includes sites where I want to go and get advice or reviews on a vacation. I want to go to Fiji. What's the best hotel in Fiji? Where's the best restaurant?
People go to TripAdvisor or those sorts of sites. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But also media distribution, dating sites, and destination sites, things like that. So those are the 3 principal businesses. About 1/3 of our business is generated through our partner channel. So as I mentioned, companies like Certify and FIS and Vita here locally. So it's a good, growing, and expanding business. We are rapidly moving into Asia. We've recently opened up an office in Tokyo and signed a couple of very strategic partners in Japan. We've opened up an office in Hong Kong and signed a number of very strategic, very large Chinese customers. But if you look at it on a global basis, about 60-65% of our business is US-based, and then Europe, South America, Asia-Pac are all participating in the balance.
So what are the kinds of improvements that a new customer to ThreatMetrix can expect in things like improved customer acquisition, eliminating chargebacks or identity fraud, the reducing the false positives or the card not present fraud? I mean, there must be some stats that you must be telling these companies, hey, we can do X for you straight away, just out of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. So it very much depends on the nature of the business. There are certain businesses that have so much fraud that if you don't have a product like ThreatMetrix, it's almost impossible to operate. So, for example, if you're doing electronic downloads and things like that, lead generation, those companies typically, without a product like ThreatMetrix, can see as much as 80% fraud. They just can't operate. So in those cases, we basically keep them in business, and we can reduce fraud down into less than 1% for those cases. Typically speaking, in a card not present environment, and again, it depends on how sophisticated the customer is. I mean, we have customers that are incredibly sophisticated, the world's largest retailers, for example, the world's largest financial services companies that are very, very sophisticated and have many, many layers of defense in place, ThreatMetrix being one of them. We have other customers that are small businesses, SMEs or venture startups or whatever the case might be, who completely rely on ThreatMetrix as their only source of fraud prevention and customer identification. But normally speaking, what we tell our customers is that you can expect about a 75% reduction in payment fraud. But what's more interesting about it, I think, and this is particularly true with our financial services customers, is that we have seen across the board between a 50 and a 70% reduction in the use of step-up authentications for those customers. So if you look at ThreatMetrix, for example, on a login, I want to go check my balance on a checking account, for example, and I'm here in Australia, my bank's in the United States, so it's not uncommon because of the IP address that they'll do a step-up authentication or an SMS message. That can cost you anywhere between 50 cents and $5. With ThreatMetrix, using ThreatMetrix, you're going to do, and by the way, 30% of those SMS messages fail.
So they don't go through the international phone network.
They don't go through the international phone network. It's 2 o'clock in the morning here. I'm on an airplane, whatever. And so 30% of them fail, which means you have a failed customer experience. And they're very expensive. Using ThreatMetrix, It's completely passive. Customer never knows that it happened. It happens in 200 milliseconds and costs a fraction of a penny. Which would you rather do?
Sure.
So, I mean, we see between 50 and 70% reductions in two-factor authentication using ThreatMetrix, and correspondingly to that, we have customers that have come back to us and said, you know, our revenues were up 10% since we put ThreatMetrix in, simply because we're not turning away, you know, we're not suffering through these false positives, which turn away customers. You know, think about that. I mean, even a 2 or 3% increase in revenue so overwhelms the cost of what we're charging the customer. Sure. It's a no-brainer. I mean, you have to have it.
I mean, some of these people, that's their profit margin.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you know, we've had some of the world's biggest IPOs this year with Alibaba and others. Any hints on what might happen with ThreatMetrix in that regard?
So we are building the company to take it public. I've done 2 previous IPOs. One as part of an executive staff, one as CEO. And you know, our goal in building ThreatMetrix from day one was to build a platform company that in fact could be a good public offering. And in fact, ThreatMetrix is a very, very well positioned company as a public company. And the reason for it is that we're not a single product company selling to a single market. You know, that's a dangerous, and by the way, I mean, it works for some people. Sure. I mean, there's clearly a lot of companies that have been able to demonstrate. GoPro is a great example of that. Yeah. I mean, they have a fabulous product.
Wildly successful.
Consumer-based product. But on a business-to-business basis, so rather than business to consumer, which is what GoPro is, on a business-to-business basis, companies that have one product into one marketplace typically don't do well as public companies. You need to have multiple products across multiple industries with multiple use cases.
And multiple revenue streams.
And multiple, right. And predictable revenue streams. And so, and that's what ThreatMetrix is. You know, we have multiple industries, e-commerce, finance, media, and in fact, we're expanding now into telco, and we're expanding into healthcare. There's other opportunities available to us. We operate on a global basis. All over the world, so we're not dependent on a single economy. We're not dependent on something bad happening along those lines, and we have multiple products. So,
and you're in Asia as well, the big growing thing that everyone's talking about.
Asia is a very exciting market, and I think people often these days kind of disassociate Japan. 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, when they thought about Asia, they thought about Japan.
But now everyone else is catching up, I mean, at a rate of knots.
They are, but we look at the major Asian countries, Japan, and I'll put China or the greater, Asian, so China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, those countries into one group, and then India, of course, as well. India is India is an interesting country. The United States invented the internet, and India invented how to make money on the internet, and they really did. And I mean, they're really good at it. So it's a connected country, and we think there's a lot of opportunity there as well for us. So, and then South America, we have a large South American customer base. So we have a global enterprise. I mean, we do business from every place from Russia to from Moscow to Chicago to Tokyo. So it's keeps me on the road a lot. I travel a lot for it, but it's an exciting business as a result of that.
Now, just quickly, what does the future hold? What will the threat landscape look like in 12 months or in 5 years? Can you give us some hints there?
So it's not just the threat landscape; it's the whole landscape, and the whole landscape is moving to mobile. I mean, really, 5 years from now, it's kind of, we bought a house that we tore down. I built a house, but there was scrapers sitting there, and when I was a kid, everybody had a kitchen phone. It was on the wall with a rotary dial
and the long cable.
And we bought this house, and there was one there. A kitchen phone with a rotary dial and a long cable, and
you put on eBay and make a fortune.
That's right. And I remember, my kids, they were much younger then, but my kids, they had a friend over, and this little girl said, "Can I call my mother?" I said, "Sure, here's the phone." And she's looking at this thing as if
she didn't know how to use it, right?
I have no clue as to how to use it. In 10 years from now, people will say, well, an Ethernet cable, it's going to be a thing of the past. I mean, the whole world is going mobile. And in fact, if you look at what the OS vendors are doing, Microsoft, for example, with System 10 that's coming out, you're going to have a single operating system that incorporates and recognizes that it's a mobile world, that you have multiple devices, that you are mobile as a person. That
your profile goes everywhere.
Your profile goes everywhere. You want to be connected everywhere. I mean, I won't name the person. I was in a car in Southern California recently with one of my employees, and we were driving to a customer site, and there's a place down near the Marine Air Force Base. There's just no internet coverage. There's no cell phone coverage.
AT&T, damn you.
Yeah, but anyway, we were trying to find this place, and so I have this Hertz map.
Yeah.
I handed him the map and said, so tell me where we are and tell me how to get to where we're going.
Yeah, you can be my Google Maps
and he's
live
looking at the map, and I looked over and I said, you know, you would be better off if you turned it over. You have it upside down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's amazing technology. You know, these cell phones, for example, people don't know how to read maps.
Yeah.
10 years from now, you're not going to know how to plug in a computer into an Ethernet connection. So the world's going mobile. And the thing about mobile is that what it does is it highly concentrates the fingerprints or the profiles of these devices. So, you know, if you have 5 iPhone 6s sitting on a table, they all look alike on the internet. You know, they have the same fonts, they have the same OS, they have the same memory, they have everything's the same on it. And so what happens there is, in order to be able to provide the kind of services that ThreatMetrix provides, which is good customer identification and bad customer identification, you have to go to this concept that we have called the persona. And you know what a persona. So in the real world, you have multiple personas. So you know, Alex shows up here. He gives me his business card. I'm a journalist. I write for this magazine. We'd like to do an interview. You've provided me a public persona, a business persona, but you also have a private persona. You know, you may have, I'm sure you have a private email address that goes back 15, 20 years. You may belong to a club. I mean, so personally, I belong to a sailing club. I belong to an antique British motorcycle club, things like that. So, I mean, you have my public persona. I give you a business card, but you don't know anything about me personally. But on the Ethernet and the internet and, you know, the virtual world, we also have private and public personas. And it's important that we be able to, for purposes of security, for purposes of good customer recognition, it's important that we be able to recognize which persona are you currently in while you're using this transaction. It's really context-based authentication, if you will. So, you know, from my office, I get on a travel site and book airplane tickets to Australia and hotel tickets from Australia. I'm using one persona. I may be doing it off my laptop computer. When I get home, using the same laptop computer, I may decide to go and buy football tickets or baseball tickets using different credentials, a different email address, a different ship to, a different credit card, things like that. But now I've tied these two things together with ThreatMetrix. So the world is mobile, and you know what we need to be able to do as security companies, as e-commerce companies, as financial services companies, it doesn't really matter, really, is recognize and embrace the fact that your customers are mobile, they're completely global, you know, they travel all over the world all of the time, and that the devices that they're using, and there's going to be a lot of different devices, need to be viewed as interconnected, and that credentials need to be privatized to ensure your privacy as a citizen. You deserve that. You need to have privacy as a citizen, but they need to be adequate enough in order to be able to allow you to conduct business. I mean, if you think about it today, if there was no internet security, if there companies like ThreatMetrix didn't exist, you wouldn't get online to do anything. It would just be absolutely too dangerous.
It really would be the wild, wild web.
It would be the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
I mean, it really would be, you know, walking into an airport knowing that there's 300 people armed to the teeth, you know, ready to rob you or do whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it would be. And so products like ThreatMetrix are needed on the one hand, but on the other hand, you know, people have a right to privacy. They have a right to be able to do business uninterrupted. They have a right to be able to, you know, the pursuit of happiness, liberty and happiness and fortune. And so that's where it's going. It's going to a mobile world. And We think that it's going to go to a highly privatized, highly sensitive mobile world where people's identities need to be protected, but nevertheless the activities, their credentials need to be authenticated to ensure that they haven't been stolen or that they're not synthetic, while still protecting their privacy and being able to manage in real time the fact that this device is here right now, and in about 18 hours it's going to be in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's good to hear, because I'm talking about the device, but the privacy, because a lot of companies on the internet seem to be going the other way. They just want to do everything they can to besmirch your privacy. And I was writing an article recently where I said, I hope privacy doesn't die a lonely and sad death in the early part of the 21st century. So it's good to see there are companies trying to defend it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, part of it is that companies are, to some extent, able to, in my view, invade your privacy because of Gen X, Gen Y, the millennials, or whatever the case might be, are so open on the internet in terms of the kind of information that they're willing to post. They're very trusting about it. Part of the reason that they're trusting is that they're 18, 19, 20 years old or younger.
Haven't experienced the world yet.
Yeah, and I think, over time, all of those people begin to realize that there are certain parts of your life that you'd rather keep private, that it's a good thing to keep private about, and it's not that you're trying to hide things,
No,
it's just, you have a private life, and that's the way it is. I don't think that there's any question, by the way, that governments, I mean, you've certainly seen it in the EU, Germany, France, Canada, Australia just passed a new privacy legislation here in order to protect the rights of consumers. It's a very tricky business. For example, cookies in Europe, you have to provide an opt-out. So, the UK Post Office, I think these statistics are right. They may be a little bit off, but so they put this opt-out on the post office, and their revenues dropped like 40% day one, and because people don't know what they are. I mean, for example, if I tell you, look, you need to clean the LSOs off of your device. If I tell most people that, they're going to look at me and go, "What's an LSO?" Yeah. They have no idea. Yeah. And so, you have very advanced technology which people take for granted. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, think about it from the viewpoint of how does your television work? How does the guy show up on the screen and talk to you? And, I have no clue as to how all of that's done. I don't really care. I just want to turn the volume up, change the channel, whatever the case might be. But the internet, in terms of privacy, I'm supportive of the fact that governments are in fact trying to enforce degrees of privacy. The problem is that in many cases they do it for political purposes. So, for example, in Germany, an IP address is considered to be personally identifiable information. Well, we're sitting here at the Sheraton Hotel in Sydney, Australia. I don't think that the IP address that I'm using through whatever internet provider, along with 2,000 other people in this hotel, really can tell you who Reed Taussig is. Yeah. That was done in direct response to the U.S. hacking Merkel's cell phone and other things like that. Yeah. And it was done for political reasons. Yeah. It's TV time for politicians.
That's it. Yeah.
And so the problem is that politicians get in front of this and they want sound bites, and that's great, and all of a sudden it gets enacted into law, and you have big bureaucracies that begin to enforce that law, and now it's very difficult to unwind. So I think that the governments of the world really need to think about where is the technology going. I heard a statistics the other day, just to try to put this in light, that if you take groceries out, the internet constitutes 15% of the gross domestic product, gross domestic spend in the United States. That is a huge number. In fact, I was in Europe a few weeks ago, and the EU wants to increase internet commerce by 20% a year over the next 5 years. And effectively, they're taking a page out of what India did extremely well, which was to monetize the internet in terms of creating employment within their own country. But if they create so many roadblocks, if they create so many problems in terms of being, like, for example, an IP address is considered PII, personally identifiable information, it's not going to happen. And so, I think what needs to happen is really a global, considered response framework, rather than rigid policies, a framework that take into account what private citizens need, what businesses need, what government needs in terms of conducting business on the internet.
And we also have, you say governments are trying to put some of this privacy legislation together, but then in Australia we have governments trying to do mandatory data retention of metadata for up to 2 years, right. Getting the ISPs to collect that,
right.
telling the ISPs they have to pay for it. Apparently in the EU this failed.
US is doing the same thing, very similar to that.
And so we the one side of government doesn't appear to know what the other side's doing, and you have all these unintended consequences.
That's right. Yeah, and it is the law of unintended consequences. It really is, and it's very, very complicated. I mean, it's kind of like, think about if you had the air traffic control system. If every country had different rules, I mean, that's
planes would
they would start crashing into each other all of the time, and that's kind of what we have on the internet today. Is every country has its own set of rules, many of which are done for political reasons, and put into place by people who really don't even understand what they're talking about. Yeah. So it's a real problem. But I do think that over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a situation where the internet is, for the westernized world, for the connected world. And by the way, I read a statistic the other day that there's only 2 billion of the 6 billion people in the world there's a third of the people that are connected. But nevertheless, I think you're going to see a situation, I can easily foresee a situation where the internet constitutes 40% of the world's economy. And if it's going to constitute, those kinds of numbers, it needs to be well managed.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you have to go to the airport very shortly. Do you have any final messages for not just iTWire readers, but your current and potential customers?
Well, that's kind of a hard question, isn't it?
It's the one I finish up with everyone.
It's really a difficult question. So I spent the last week here in Australia, and I gave a presentation at the Vita User Group conference yesterday, which was very well received. Australia has an interesting project going on, which I would love to be involved with. ThreatMetrix should be involved with, which is called MyGov. Maybe you've heard about that.
Yeah, I was reporting on the people who put together the Drupal backend for this.
Kind of single sign-on for the government. So single sign-on for the government is a fabulous service for consumers. I want to do health issues or tax issues or whatever the case might be. It's also a single point of failure. That if it's hacked in any way, shape, or form, I have now gigantic access to all of your services. This is a great use case for ThreatMetrix. This is the kind of thing that we do the best. But anyway, I thought it was a very interesting. I was down in Canberra day before yesterday, and for me, it was very forward-thinking on the part of the Australian government to put this thing together, and obviously I'd like to participate in it as well.
And you were no doubt talking to them about getting involved.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I thought that was really quite exciting. But I think it's a fabulous use case for what ThreatMetrix does, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reed.